The front wheel of Elias Chato's wheelchair dropped into the rut so hard that he nearly spilled into the street. His right hand caught the wooden rim. His injured leg struck the side of the chair, and pain shot from his knee to his hip. Elias clenched his jaw and waited for it to pass. Then he heard laughter. 3 young women stood outside the general store. The blonde in the middle looked at Elias, then at his dusty clothes and worn travel bag. "Well, that is unfortunate." Her friend smiled. "What is a man without a horse?" The third woman glanced at the wheelchair. Maybe the horse got tired of carrying him. Their laughter carried across the street. 2 men outside the saloon turned to watch. Elias tried the wheel again. It only sank deeper. The blonde stepped closer. "Need someone to push you?" "I was considering it. Perhaps you should find yourself a wife." Elias looked up. "Are you volunteering?" One of her friends choked back a laugh. The blonde's smile disappeared. "Hardly. A woman would have to provide you with money, a horse, and 2 good legs." Her friends laughed again. "That sounds expensive." Elias said, "I understand why you declined." This time one of the men outside the saloon laughed. The woman's face reddened. "You think you're amusing?" "No, ma'am. I think you are doing enough for both of us." A woman's voice came from behind them. "Clara, are you planning to help that man? Or are you just trying to make sure everyone in town knows your mother wasted money on finishing school?" The street went quiet. A young woman stood outside the general store with a sack of flour against one hip. Brown hair had escaped beneath her bonnet, and there was nothing delicate about the look she gave Clara. Clara stiffened. "Sarah Belle, nobody asked you." "I noticed. That's usually when I'm most useful." One of the saloon men coughed into his fist to hide another laugh. Sarah set down the flour and walked toward Elias. He watched her approach. "If you've come to defend my honor, I'm afraid there isn't much left." "I wasn't planning to." "Good. I'm trying to save the street. You've been blocking it for 5 minutes." Elias stared at her. Sarah almost smiled. Instead of grabbing the handles of his wheelchair, she crouched beside the trapped wheel. She found a short plank near the hitching rail and wedged it beneath the tire. "Try now." Elias pushed. The wheel climbed onto the plank and rolled free. Sarah stepped aside. He looked at her. "You could have pushed. You could push yourself." Something in Elias's expression changed. "Thank you. You're welcome." Sarah picked up her flour. Clara muttered, "You always did have a weakness for strays." Sarah stopped. She looked back at Clara, then at Elias. "Maybe. Strays usually have better manners." Even Elias laughed at that. Sarah walked away. "Ma'am." She turned. "Does everyone in this town welcome strangers like this?" "No." "Good." Sarah shifted the flour against her hip. "Some of us wait until supper." Then she disappeared into the little restaurant farther down the street. Elias remained where he was for a moment, watching the door close behind her. He had come to this town wearing old clothes, carrying almost nothing, and using a name stripped of everything that made people treat Elias Chato differently. He wanted to know what remained when money, land, and reputation disappeared. In less than an hour, he had already learned something. Cruelty came easily when people thought a man had nothing. Pity came almost as easily. But Sarah Belle had offered him neither. She had simply placed a plank beneath his wheel and expected him to push, for the first time since leaving home. Elias found himself curious about someone other than himself. He did not know it yet, but that curiosity was about to lead him somewhere he had never intended to go. And Sarah Belle was about to discover that the stranger she had just helped was not quite the man he appeared to be. So stay with us, because this was only the beginning. And if you enjoy heartfelt Western stories like this one, subscribe to the channel. Now, Elias had one problem. He wanted to see Sarah Belle again. Fortunately, the smell of beef stew drifting from the little restaurant down the street gave him an excuse. The painted sign above the door read, Belle's Kitchen. Elias rolled inside and found Sarah behind the counter, sleeves rolled to her elbows, arguing with a stubborn coffee pot. She looked up. You again? I was told some people wait until supper. Sarah recognized her own words and gave him a suspicious look. I didn't say supper was free. That's unfortunate. Why? Elias glanced towards the kitchen. Because it smells expensive. A small smile escaped her before she turned away. 10 minutes later, Sarah placed a bowl of stew before him. Elias had barely touched the spoon when she noticed the hesitation in his face. What? There's something I should tell you. Sarah waited. I can't pay for this. Her eyes narrowed. Elias expected pity, irritation, perhaps an offer to forget the debt. Sarah took the bowl away. He blinked. That was quick. Can you use a knife? Yes. She disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a basket of potatoes. She placed it in his lap, then handed him a knife. Peel. Elias looked from the potatoes to Sarah. All of them. Depends how hungry you are. For the second time that day, Sarah Belle surprised him. She brought the stew back. A few minutes later, a little girl appeared beside his chair. She had brown hair like Sarah's, and the solemn expression of someone inspecting questionable merchandise. She stared at his injured leg. Lucy, Sarah warned. I'm not staring. You are. Lucy considered that. I'm looking for a long time. Elias lowered his head to hide a smile. Does your leg hurt? Sometimes. Can you walk? Not very well. Will you someday? Elias paused. I hope so. Lucy nodded as if that settled the matter, then pointed at the potato in his hand. You're leaving too much skin. Am I? Mama says potatoes cost money. Your mother has mentioned money. From behind the counter, Sarah said, my daughter is 7 and already understands business better than you. Elias looked at Lucy. I'm beginning to suspect that. What neither Sarah nor Lucy knew was that Elias could have bought every potato in the kitchen, the building around them, and most of the land visible from its windows. Elias Chato owned one of the largest ranches in that part of Arizona. 4 months earlier, a frightened stallion had crushed his right leg against a fence. The doctors had saved it, but they could not promise when or how well he would walk again. The accident had changed more than his body. It had shown him what his fiancée truly feared losing. Not him, his money, his ranch, the life his name provided. So Elias had left Chato Ranch with old colonies, a small bag, and enough hidden money for an emergency. He wanted, just once, to know how people would treat a man who appeared to have nothing. By sunset, the potatoes were peeled and the stew was gone. Elias rolled toward the door. Lucy called after him. Are you coming back tomorrow? He stopped. He had planned to leave town in the morning. One day, here had been enough. That had been the plan. Elias glanced at Sarah. She was pretending not to listen. Then he looked at Lucy. Maybe. The next morning, Belle's kitchen had barely opened when Sarah heard the familiar sound of wooden wheels outside. Elias had intended to stay one day. He stayed another. By the third morning, Sarah stopped pretending Elias was merely passing through. He arrived before breakfast, peeled potatoes without being asked, carried what he could from his chair, cleaned totes, repaired a loose cabinet hinge, and somehow managed to irritate Sarah before she had finished her first cup of coffee. That afternoon, Elias made her an offer. "I need work." Sarah looked at him. "You've been working. I mean regular work. Can I afford regular work? Probably not." "Good. I'm glad we've established that." Elias glanced toward the narrow storeroom behind the kitchen. Meals and somewhere dry to sleep. Sarah followed his eyes. "You want to sleep in my storeroom? I've slept in worse places recently." Elias thought of the enormous bedroom waiting for him at Chato Ranch. "Not recently." Sarah studied him for a long moment. She needed help. And the storeroom contained little besides flour sacks, preserves, and an old cot Daniel had once used during long winter nights at the restaurant. "1 week," she said. "You work for your meals and the cot. If you become troublesome, you leave." "What qualifies as troublesome?" "I'll decide when it happens." "That seems dangerously broad." "It is." They shook hands. By the end of the week, Sarah had discovered that Elias might be the worst poor man in Arizona. He knew how to repair expensive saddles. He could add a page of accounts faster than Sarah could check it. He recognized good coffee, bad whiskey, cattle brands from distant counties, and once corrected a traveling merchant on the price of breeding stock without looking up from the potatoes he was peeling. The worst mistake came when a rancher tied a bay gelding outside Belle's kitchen. Elias watched the animal take 6 steps, left hind hoof. Sarah glanced through the window. "What? He's favoring it." The rancher had noticed nothing. 2 days later, he returned complaining that the gelding had gone lame in the left hind hoof. Sarah slowly turned toward Elias. He concentrated very hard on a carrot. "Who are you?" "Eli." "I know your name." "Then we've made progress." "I'm serious." "So am I." Sarah folded her arms. "You have no money, no horse, no home. But you know horses better than men who own 50 of them." "Maybe that's why I have no money." She stared at him. Elias finally looked up. "Poor business decisions." Sarah walked away, but he heard her mutter, "Worst poor man in Arizona." The name stuck. At the end of his second week, Sarah placed 3 coins in his palm. Elias frowned. "What's this?" "Your wages. We agreed on meals and a bed." "You've done more than we agreed. I don't need it." That made Sarah suspicious again. Elias corrected himself. "I mean, I can manage. Take the money." "Eli?" He did. That night, he spent 2 coins on a small ribbon Lucy had admired in the general store. The third he kept. It was worth almost nothing. Yet Elias tucked it carefully into the inside pocket of his coat. The following afternoon, a broad-shouldered man entered Belle's kitchen, carrying a repaired iron stove latch. Lucy ran toward him. "Thomas." Thomas Reed lifted her easily with one arm. "There's my favorite troublemaker." Sarah came from the kitchen, and her face softened. "You fixed it already." "You sounded desperate." "I was desperate." Thomas smiled. "Then I expect coffee." Elias watched from across the room. Thomas was a blacksmith. Strong, steady, plainly dressed, and comfortable in Sarah's kitchen in a way that suggested he had been there many times before. Then Thomas made Sarah laugh. Not the surprised laugh Elias sometimes managed to pull from her. An easy one, a familiar one. Lucy was still hanging from Thomas's arm. They looked, Elias thought, irritatingly natural together. Sarah noticed him watching. "Eli, this is Thomas Reed." Thomas offered his hand without hesitation. Elias shook it. "Good to meet you. You too." There was nothing arrogant in Thomas's voice, nothing Elias could reasonably dislike. That somehow made it worse. A few minutes later, Thomas leaned against the counter while Sarah poured his coffee. And Elias found himself peeling the same potato long after there was no skin left on it. Lucy looked at his hands. "You're making it smaller." Elias stopped. Across the room, Sarah laughed at something Thomas had said. Elias stared at the ruined potato in his palm. He had come to this town to discover whether anyone could care for a man with no money, no ranch, and an uncertain future. Jealousy had never been part of the experiment. But as Thomas smiled at Sarah, Elias realized the experiment was no longer going according to plan. Thomas Reed gave Elias no good reason to dislike him. That was inconvenient. He never treated Elias as helpless, never spoke to him with pity, and never behaved as though Sarah belonged to him. When the two men crossed paths, Thomas simply nodded, spoke plainly, and went about his business. So Elias kept his jealousy to himself. Lucy, unfortunately, had no such respect for private feelings. A few days later, Elias was behind Belle's kitchen, repairing a loose crate, when one wheel sank into a patch of soft ground. Lucy immediately ran behind him and grabbed the handles of his chair. "I can push, don't?" The sharpness of his voice stopped her. Lucy released the handles. "I was only helping." "I know." Her face fell. Elias hated himself for causing it. But he pushed hard against the wheels until he freed the chair without her. That evening, Sarah found him alone behind the kitchen. "You hurt her feelings." "I know." "Then why did you do it?" Elias looked toward the empty street. "Children shouldn't have to push broken men." Sarah's expression changed. "Is that what you think you are?" He gave no answer. Sarah sat on the step beside him. "Lucy doesn't see a broken man." "What does she see?" "The man who fixed her wooden horse, sneaks her extra biscuits, and somehow makes potatoes smaller every time Thomas visits." Elias looked at her. Sarah almost smiled, but this time she let the joke pass. "She wanted to help you, Eli, that's all. I've had enough people helping me." "No, you've had enough people pitying you. They aren't the same thing." The words stayed with him. Later that night, after Sarah and Lucy had gone upstairs, Elias wheeled himself behind the kitchen and locked the chair beside the fence. He gripped the top rail. Then he stood. His right leg trembled violently. One breath, one step. Pain tightened across his face. He forced another. His knee gave way. Elias hit the ground. "Eli." Sarah stood in the doorway. He tried to rise. She moved toward him. "Don't." Sarah stopped immediately. That almost made it worse. She did not rush forward. She did not tell him he was foolish. She simply waited. Elias tried again and failed. His breathing grew ragged. Finally, he looked at her. "Sarah." "Yes." He held out his hand. "Now." She came to him. Sarah did not pull him up. She gave him something solid to hold while he lifted himself. Elias stood. His fingers tightened around hers. "One," Sarah whispered. He moved his injured leg. "Two." His face went pale. "That's enough. One more, Eli." "One more." Sarah steadied him. He took the third step. Then he sagged against the fence, laughing once from exhaustion. Sarah was close enough that Elias could feel her breath against his cheek. "You are the most stubborn man I've ever met." "I'll take that as encouragement." It wasn't. But neither moved away. Her hand was still in his. For several quiet seconds, Elias forgot the ranch, the money, the reason he had come to town, even the chair waiting behind him. He saw only Sarah. Then a sleepy voice came from the doorway. "Mama." They separated. Lucy stood there holding her blanket. Sarah went to her. But Lucy looked past her mother at Elias, standing against the fence. Her eyes widened. You did it. 3 steps. Lucy smiled as though he had crossed all of Arizona. That night, Elias lay on the narrow cot in the storeroom, listening to Sarah tuck Lucy into bed above him. He heard the floorboards creak. Lucy laughed softly, and Trey tell her it was time to sleep. For years, Elias had owned a house large enough to lose himself inside. Yet lying in a storeroom behind a small kitchen, listening to a mother and daughter settle in for the night, he felt the strange ache of wanting something his money had never given him. For the first time, Elias was no longer wondering whether Sarah Belle could love a man like him. He was beginning to wonder what it might feel like to belong to her little family. By then, Elias had stopped counting the days. Belle's kitchen had quietly become the center of his life. He woke on the narrow cot in the storeroom to Sarah's footsteps overhead, worked beside her until sunset, and spent his evenings listening to Lucy tell stories that rarely had a beginning and almost never had an end. That night, after the last customer left, the 3 of them ate supper beside the window. Lucy complained about carrots. Sarah told her carrots had never harmed anyone. Elias suggested there might be evidence they had not yet considered. Sarah gave him a look, and then Lucy laughed so hard she nearly spilled her milk. It was nothing important, just supper in a small kitchen. Yet Elias found himself wishing the evening would last. Afterward, Sarah washed dishes while Elias dried them from his chair. Lucy sat on the floor with an old wooden box she had pulled from a cabinet. "What's in there?" Elias asked. "Papa." The plate in Elias's hands stopped moving. Lucy opened the box. There was a pocket knife, a brass button, several folded letters, and a faded photograph. She picked it up carefully and brought it to him. "That's my papa." Elias smiled as he took it. Then the smile disappeared. The man in the photograph stood beside a horse, younger and cleaner than Elias remembered him. But there was no mistaking the eyes. Suddenly, Elias could smell wet earth again. He could hear terrified horses in the darkness, men shouting through rain, boots slipping over rock, and somewhere beneath all of it, he could hear a man's ragged breathing. His fingers tightened around the photograph. Sarah noticed. His name was Daniel. Elias raised his eyes slowly. "Daniel Belle." Sarah stopped drying her hands. "Yes." "Did you know him?" There it was, a door standing open. Elias needed only to walk through it. "Yes, Sarah. I knew him." His mouth opened. Nothing came. Lucy leaned against his chair, looking at the photograph with him. Elias felt the warmth of her small shoulder against his arm. And suddenly, the words seemed impossible. "I've heard the name," he said. The lie was small. It felt enormous. Sarah sat across from him. "He died 3 years ago." Working with horses' faces, Elias already knew what she was going to say, and some desperate part of him wanted to stop her before she said it. "Where?" "Chato Ranch." The room seemed to lose its warmth. Elias looked down at Daniel's face. He remembered that night more clearly now. Daniel had gone back when another ranch hand was trapped in the path of frightened horses. By the time Elias reached him, below the rocky slope, there was blood beneath Daniel's coat, and no doctor close enough to matter. Sarah continued speaking, unaware that every word was tightening something in him. "The ranch sent money afterward. I kept enough to get Lucy and me through the worst of it, then sent most of it back." "Why?" Elias asked quietly. Sarah looked toward her daughter. "Because money wasn't what Lucy had lost." Elias closed his eyes for a moment. He had authorized that money. He had signed the letter that accompanied it. He had believed he was helping a widow whose face he had never seen. Now she was sitting across from him, and her daughter was leaning against his wheelchair. Sarah. She looked at him. He could tell her now. He should tell her now. His real name, the ranch, the man in the photograph, everything. I need to tell you something. Sarah waited. Elias looked at Lucy, then back at Sarah. But what rose in his memory was not Chateau Ranch. It was Daniel's lying beneath a black Arizona skiway, struggling for one more breath. And at last Elias understood what the dying man had meant when he whispered about his girls. They were sitting in front of him. Elias did not sleep that night. Long after Belle's kitchen had gone quiet, he lay on the narrow cot, staring into the darkness, seeing Daniel Belle as he had seen him 3 years earlier. Rain had turned the ground beneath the horses into mud. One young ranch hand had fallen in the path of the frightened herd, and Daniel had gone back for him when every sensible instinct said to run. He saved the boy. It cost him his life. Elias remembered reaching Daniel below the rocky slope, remembered pressing both hands against a wound. He already knew he could not stop. Daniel had asked whether the boy was alive. Elias told him yes. Then, near the end, Daniel had whispered 2 words Elias had never understood until tonight. My girls. Elias had promised they would be taken care of. He had thought money was the only promise he could keep. Now one of those girls slept upstairs, and the other trusted him enough to let him into her home. When he left Chateau Ranch, the deception had seemed almost harmless. He had wanted to know what remained of Elias Chateau when the money, the land, and the name were taken away. He had never expected Sarah. He had never expected Lucy. And he certainly had never imagined that a dead man from his own past would be waiting for him inside a little wooden box. What had begun as a lie about who he was had become something far more dangerous. Sarah trusted Eli. Lucy was beginning to love him. And neither of them knew that Elias Chateau had once knelt in the rain beside Daniel Belle as he died. Elias looked toward the stairs where Sarah had disappeared. He had already chosen silence once. He would not choose it again. The next few days changed something between them. Alive, Elias was still Elias. In every way, Sarah understood him. He worked for his meals and the cot behind her kitchen. He still used the wheelchair. He still fought for every painful step beside the fence. But the easy warmth between them had grown keener, more careful. As if both had begun to recognize something neither was ready to name. Thomas noticed too. One evening, he stopped by after closing. Lucy was upstairs, and Elias had gone behind the kitchen to exercise his leg. When he returned, Thomas was standing near the door. I'll see you Sunday, Sarah. Sarah hesitated. Thomas? He stopped. I don't want you waiting for something I can't promise. Thomas understood before she finished. His disappointment showed, but there was no anger in it. It's him. Sarah looked toward the back door. Yes. Thomas nodded slowly. All right. You deserve more than that. So do you. He put on his hat and left. Elias had heard enough to understand. Sarah turned and found him there. For a moment, neither spoke. You shouldn't have heard that, she said. I didn't mean to. No. You usually cause trouble on purpose. Normally, Elias would have answered. Tonight he could not. Thomas can give you things I can't. Sarah's expression hardened. Don't? A steady home, security. He can take care of you and Lucy. I've been taking care of Lucy for 3 years. I know. Then why are you deciding what I need? Elias fell silent. Sarah stepped closer. I'm 27 years old. Eli, I've buried a husband. I've raised a daughter. I've kept this place alive when I wasn't sure I could keep myself standing. I don't need Thomas to choose my future for me. She looked directly at him. And I don't need you to do it either. The words struck Elias harder because of everything she did not know. You don't know what life with me would look like. No. I don't know how well I'll walk. I don't even know where I'll be 6 months from now. I know. Then why? Sarah's eyes softened. Because when Lucy laughs upstairs, you listen for it. Elias said nothing. Because you make me angry at least once a day, and somehow I miss you when you're gone for an hour. She came closer. And because I'm tired of choosing my life by what I'm afraid to lose. Sarah kissed him. For one brief moment, Elias let himself forget everything. Then he remembered Daniel, the ranch, his real name. When they parted, Elias did not let go of her hand. Sarah. Something in his voice made her smile disappear. What is it? Tomorrow morning. I want to take you somewhere. Where? Chateau Ranch. Sarah went still. Elias saw the name strike exactly where he knew it would. Daniel died there. I know. Her eyes searched his face. Why do you want to take me there? Elias looked toward Daniel's photograph on the shelf. Because there are things about that night you deserve to hear from someone who was there. Sarah's fingers slowly loosened around his. For several seconds, she said nothing. You knew Daniel. It was not quite a question. Elias looked at her. Tomorrow, I'll tell you everything. Why not now? Because there's a place I need you to see. Sarah studied him for a long moment. Should I be afraid of what you're going to tell me? Elias could have lied. He didn't. Yes, Sarah swallowed. Tomorrow morning. Then, tomorrow morning. Elias barely slept. Sarah deserved more than a confession whispered across a kitchen table. She deserved to know where Daniel had died. She deserved to know what he had done that night, what his last thoughts had been, and who had been holding his hand when he took his final breath. Tomorrow, Elias would take her there, and before they came back, Sarah Belle would know everything. Elias was awake before sunrise. By the time Sarah came downstairs, he was already dressed. Daniel's photograph rested inside his coat. Sarah looked at him, then at the chair. Still want to go? More than I did last night. She nodded. Neither of them ate much breakfast. Lucy watched them suspiciously from the table. Where are you going? Sarah reached down and kissed the top of her head. Somewhere important. Elias looked at Sarah. In another hour. There would be no Eli left between them. No false name. No hidden ranch. No secret about Daniel. Whatever happened afterward would be Sarah's choice. He was finally ready to give it to her. Then hoofbeats sounded outside Belle's kitchen. Fast. Too fast. Elias turned toward the window. A woman dismounted before the horse had fully stopped. His blood went cold. Rosa had found him. Rosa crossed the street quickly, anger and relief fighting across her face. Elias had barely reached the doorway when she threw her arms around him. Elias Chao, if you ever disappear like that again, I swear I'll break the leg the horse didn't. Rosa, I've spent 3 weeks looking for you. Rosa. What? Elias looked past her. Sarah stood behind him. The color had drained from her face. What did you call him? Rosa's anger vanished. Elias felt the moment he had feared closing around him. Sarah. She did not look away. Your name. Elias Chateau. Sarah stared at him. Chateau. Rosa glanced between them and finally understood. She doesn't know. Elias closed his eyes briefly. Sarah stepped backward. Chateau Ranch. Yes. The Chateau Ranch. Yes, Rosa spoke softly. It belongs to him. Sarah looked at Elias, as though she were trying to recognize the man, sitting only a few feet away. Belongs to him. Elias forced himself not to look away. The ranch, the horses, the cattle, all of it. And the money. Sarah, how much? Enough that I never needed to work for a meal here. Silence filled the kitchen. Sarah's eyes moved toward the storeroom where Elias had slept, then toward the counter where he had peeled potatoes for weeks. You let me think you had nowhere to go. I did. You let me pay you. Elias touched the pocket where he still carried her coin. Yes. Why? After my accident, I learned that someone I trusted cared more about what my name could give her than what happened to me. I left because I wanted to know how people treated me when they believed I had nothing. Sarah's eyes hardened. So we were an experiment. No, not at first, perhaps. Elias had no answer. Then Sarah looked at Daniel's photograph on the table. Something changed in her face. Chato Ranch. Elias knew what was coming. Daniel worked for you. Yes. Rosa quietly stepped outside and closed the door. Sarah's voice dropped. When did you know who he was? The night Lucy showed me his photograph. Sarah stared at him. You knew. Yes, but you didn't. No. Her hand went to her mouth. When she spoke again, her voice trembled. Were you there when he died? Elias looked at Daniel's photograph. Yes. Sarah sat down. For several seconds, she seemed unable to breathe. Tell me. Elias moved closer, but stopped before reaching her. There was a storm that night. The horses panicked. One of the younger hands fell where the herd was turning. Daniel went back for him. Sarah closed her eyes. He saved the boy. Elias continued, but Daniel was struck and thrown down the slope. I reached him first. Was he alone? No. Her eyes opened. I stayed with him. Tears gathered before Sarah could stop them. Was he afraid? Elias remembered the rain on Daniel's face, his hand gripping Elias's sleeve. Yes, but not for himself. Sarah began to cry silently. He asked about the boy. I told him the boy was alive. Then he asked me to take care of his girls. Sarah covered her mouth. Elias's voice nearly failed. I didn't know who he meant. I didn't know your names. I promised him anyway. Afterward, I authorized the money the ranch sent. Sarah bowed her head. His last thoughts were of you and Lucy. For a long time, there was only the sound of Sarah crying. Elias wanted to touch her. He did not. At last Sarah wiped her face. I spent 3 years wondering whether he died alone. He didn't. She looked at him. And for one fragile moment, Elias saw gratitude through the grief. Then it disappeared. I don't blame you for Daniel. Elias breathed again. The accident wasn't your fault. Daniel chose to go back for that man. I know the kind of man my husband was. Sarah. But you knew. The relief died inside him. You sat at my table after you knew. You let Lucy climb into your lap. You listened to me talk about my husband, while you carried his last moments inside you. I was afraid I'd lose you. And that gave you the right to decide what I was allowed to know. No, you wanted the truth from me while giving me only the pieces of yourself you thought were safe. Elias lowered his head. Sarah's voice broke. I don't blame you for what happened to Daniel. Elias. She looked directly at him. I blame you because you knew the truth and still let me love you in the dark. Elias had spent weeks fearing that Sarah would discover who he really was. Only now did he understand that the name Elias Chato was not the truth that had destroyed them. It was all the days he had chosen not to say it. Sarah did not ask Elias to leave immediately. Somehow, that made it worse. She stood beside Daniel's photograph for a long time before speaking. I need you to go. Elias looked at her. Sarah, please. Not because you're rich, Not because Daniel worked for you. I need you to understand that. I do. No, I don't think you do. Her eyes were swollen, but her voice had become painfully calm. I chose you knowing you had no money. I chose you knowing I might spend years helping you through that door. I chose you, knowing Lucien, I might have to carry more, because your leg couldn't. Each word made it harder for Elias to breathe. And all that time, you knew the life I thought I was choosing wasn't the life you actually had. I never wanted to hurt you, but you wanted to control when I learned enough to make my own choice. Elias lowered his eyes. There was nothing left to defend. Sarah turned toward the stairs. Then he heard small footsteps. Lucy stood at the bottom in her nightdress, clutching the wooden horse Elias had repaired for her. Where are you going? Neither adult answered. Lucy looked at the bag across Elias's lap. Her face changed. Are you leaving? Elias could barely make himself speak. Yes. For how long? He looked at Sarah. She turned her face away. I don't know. Lucy came closer. Did I do something? The question struck Elias, harder than any accusation Sarah could have made. No. He reached for Lucy's hand. No, sweetheart, never. Then why can't you stay? Elias opened his mouth. Nothing came. For weeks, he had hidden behind lies because the truth frightened him. Now the truth was simple, and somehow worse, because I hurt your mother. Lucy looked toward Sarah, then back at him. Can you say sorry? Elias's eyes burned. I did, and it didn't fix it. No. Lucy lowered her eyes to the wooden horse. Oh. That single word broke something inside him. Elias bent and kissed the top of her head. Then he rolled through the door without looking back. For the first time since arriving in town, he slept somewhere else. Rosa found him a room, but Elias barely noticed it. He sat awake with Sarah's coin in his palm and finally understood what he had done. He had disguised himself because he was afraid another woman would choose Elias Chato's money instead of Elias Chato. But Sarah had chosen him when she believed there was no money. She had given him the answer he wanted, and still, he had not trusted her with the truth. The next afternoon, Elias returned only to collect the small bag he had left behind. He stopped across the street from Belle's kitchen, unable to make himself approach the door. Then a scream tore through the town. Another followed. Horses thundered somewhere beyond the buildings. People began running. Elias turned his wheelchair toward the noise, just as a terrified voice cried out above the chaos. Lucy. Sarah was already running toward the street, and Elias saw, with sudden horror, where her daughter was standing. The horses came around the corner in a wall of dust. 6 of them, terrified and running blind. A wagon had overturned near the far end of the street, scattering crates beneath their hooves. People threw themselves against storefronts as the herd thundered forward. Lucy stood in the middle of the road. She had dropped the wooden horse. Lucy, don't run. Elias's voice cut through the screaming. The girl turned toward him. Look at me. Sarah was racing from the other side of the street, but Elias knew she would never reach Lucy before the horses did. He studied the herd. 5 were following the gray mare in front. If Lucy stayed still, they would turn around her. Don't move, sweetheart. Whatever happens, don't run. Lucy was crying now, but she obeyed. The gray mare saw her. Her head lifted. She veered. The others followed. For one heartbeat. Elias thought it was over. Then he saw the chestnut. It had separated from the herd. A broken length of harness whipped against its flank, driving it into greater panic. It was not following the mare. It was running straight toward Lucy. Elias pushed his wheels. The chair struck a fallen crate and stopped. There was no time to go around. He looked at Lucy, then at the horse. Elias locked the wheels and threw himself out of the chair. His knees hit the dirt. Pain exploded through his right leg. He crawled, one arm forward, then the other, dragging the useless leg behind him. "Stay there, Lucy!" She screamed his name. Elias pulled himself harder. Something tore inside his injured leg. He nearly collapsed. The chestnut was seconds away. Elias reached Lucy, caught her dress, and dragged her toward him. He twisted his body around hers and pressed the child's face against his chest. "Close your eyes." The horse thundered past. A hoof struck Elias's lower leg. White pain tore through him. Then there was only dust. Sarah reached them first. Sarah stopped so suddenly that she nearly fell. For one terrible second, she could only stare. Elias was lying in the dirt with his injured leg twisted beneath him, his wheelchair several yards away. Lucy was curled against his chest, completely covered by his body. One of Elias's arms was wrapped around the back of her head, the other still holding her against him, as though the horses might somehow return. Sarah had seen him struggle to stand. She had watched 3 steps leave him shaking with pain. She knew exactly what it had cost him to cross that street without his chair. And he had done it without knowing whether she would ever forgive him. Something inside Sarah gave way. Not the hurt, not yet. But beneath all the anger and betrayal was a truth she could no longer deny. Whatever else Elias Chato had lied about, he had never lied about loving her daughter. Sarah dropped to her knees beside to hide them. "Elias!" He barely heard her. His arms were still around Lucy. "Is she hurt?" Sarah dropped to her knees. Lucy was sobbing, but there was no blood. "She's all right." Only then did Elias release the breath he had been holding. His face collapsed against the dirt. Hours later, he woke in the doctor's office with his right leg bound tighter than before. Sarah sat beside Lucy across the room. The doctor finished examining him and slowly shook his head. "You were healing well." Elias looked down at the bandages. "You've torn some of the tissue that was beginning to mend. I can't tell you yet how much damage you've done." Sarah's face tightened. "How long?" she asked. The doctor looked at Elias. "Months, perhaps. Everything he gained may have to be earned again." Elias closed his eyes. 3 steps beside a fence had once felt like a miracle. Now even those 3 steps might be months away. He opened his eyes and looked across the room. Lucy was alive. If that was the price, Elias knew he would pay it again. Sarah came to Elias the morning after the accident. Lucy was safe at home, and Elias was back in the wheelchair, his injured leg bound and elevated. For a while, Sarah said nothing. Then she sat beside him. "Thank you for saving her." Elias looked at her. "You never have to thank me for that. You may have cost yourself months of healing. I'd do it again. I know." Sarah's eyes filled, but she did not look away. "That's what makes this harder." Elias understood. Saving Lucy could prove that he loved her. It could not restore the trust he had broken. "I'm not asking you to forgive me." "What are you asking?" "Nothing." That answer surprised her. Elias lowered his eyes to his bandaged leg. "I spent too much time deciding what you should know, when you should know it, and what you might do once you did. I won't make that choice for you again." So he didn't. The weeks passed. Elias remained in town while his leg began the slow work of healing again. He stopped hiding behind Eli. When Sarah asked about Chato Ranch, he answered. When she asked about his former fiancée, he told her the parts that made him ashamed as well as the parts that made him sympathetic. When she wanted to see Daniel's accident report, Elias gave it to her without explanation or defense. One evening, Sarah returned the papers and sat quietly beside him. Did Daniel say anything else? Elias thought carefully. He wanted to know the young man he saved would get home. Sarah smiled through tears. That sounds like Daniel. Elias looked at her. I can't be him. Sarah shook her head. I never asked you to be. It was not forgiveness spoken aloud. But when Sarah placed her hand over his, Elias knew the door was no longer closed. He did not rush through it. He waited. And little by little, Sarah began letting him back into the ordinary places of her life. A few months later, on an otherwise ordinary morning in Belle's kitchen, Lucy called Elias by a name she had never seen before. A few months later, Elias stood at the counter in Belle's kitchen, one hand resting on his cane as he inspected a tray of biscuits. His leg was healing slowly. Some days he walked. Some days the wheelchair still carried him. He no longer cared which kind of day it was. Lucy sat at the table swinging her feet beneath the chair. Pa, your biscuits are burning. Elias stopped breathing. Sarah slowly lowered the coffee pot. What did you call me? Lucy looked suddenly shy, but she did not take it back. Pa, something tightened in Elias's throat. You can mean it, Lucy. She slipped down from her chair, walked to him, and wrapped both arms around his waist. I did. Elias closed his eyes and held her. He had owned thousands of acres. Horses men crossed territories to buy, and more money than he could spend, yet nothing had ever made him feel as rich as those two small arms around him. When he opened his eyes, Sarah was crying. She stepped closer and touched his cheek. Looks like you are stuck with us, Mr. Chateau. Elias covered her hand with his. I was hoping so. Sarah kissed him, gently and without hurry. Lucy squeezed herself between them, and Elias laughed as he gathered them both close. For one quiet moment, Belle's kitchen held everything he had once gone looking for, without knowing its name. Then Sarah sniffed. Elias. What? The biscuits. Smoke curled from the oven. Damn. Language. Lucy grinned. Pa said damn. Elias looked at his family. This title comes with a lot of rules, Sarah smiled. You have no idea. And this time Wayne, their laughter filled the little kitchen. Elias knew he was home.